Hi everyone! So I recently made a ton of these crochet pumpkins and I just wanted to share how I did it in case anybody else wanted to make some as well, because they are so cute. So the first thing you're going to do is make a slip knot, which is what I'm doing right here. And then you're going to make the foundation chain, which is going to be 26 chains long. To make a chain, you put the yarn over your hook and then you pull that new loop through the previous loop. You can do as many loops as you want for your pumpkin, which is how many stitches you'll be doing for each, but I do 25 and then I do 35 rows, so I add 10 rows to the amount of stitches I do for the proportions. So if you want 25 stitches, you have to chain one extra loop in your foundation chain. So at the end of the foundation chain, you'll have 26 loops. So now we'll be putting the first row of our stitch into the foundation chain. So I use a half double crochet for the entire pumpkin, which is what you're watching right now. So the reason that we made 26 chains is because you're not going into the chain closest to your hook, you're going into the second V. So that'll make 25 stitches total for your rows. For a half double crochet, you yarn over, putting a loop onto the hook, and then a stitch looks like a V. So that top part of the V, or the left side of it, is what you're putting your hook into. So you're putting your hook into that loop and then yarning over again and pulling another loop through that foundation chain. And then when you have 3 loops on your hook, you yarn over again and pull that new loop through all 3 of the old loops on your hook. And after that, you're going to place 1 half double crochet into each stitch down the foundation chain. And this is how it should look after you've done 25. And then you're going to chain 1 to create height for the next row. So for row 2, you're doing the same half double crochet, and now you're going into the top part of the V, just like the foundation chain, which is called going through the back loop only. And this is going to create a ribbing effect for the ribs of the pumpkin. And you're going to do this for 35 rows total. So after the second row, you'll have 33 more rows of this. And don't forget to chain 1 after every row to create the height for the next row. So after you do 35 rows, you're done crocheting and you're going to be attaching the end of the panel to the other end so you can stuff the pumpkin. To make sure that the front of the stitch is showing on the outside of the pumpkin, you look at the bottom of the tail of the first bit of yarn, and it should be on the left side. So this is the front or the right side, and the other side is the back or the wrong side. And where we attach the 2 ends, there will be a seam, so you want the seam to be facing inside. So you're going to have it facing how it would inside out when you're attaching it. To attach them, I'm doing a slip stitch and I'm putting the hook through the stitch like usual, both parts of the V, and then you're placing it into the foundation chain so it only has one side of the V. So you just put it in there wherever it looks right, and then you're yarning over and pulling a loop through that, and then pulling the loop through the other loop on your hook. And at the end, you're just going to chain one, and then you're going to cut the working yarn. Make it a little long because you're going to be using this to sew the bottom of the pumpkin. And then you're going to pull your hook and pull the string through the loop that you've created to create a little knot right there. And now we're going to sew it, so get any type of tapestry, embroidery, darning needle, and put the thread through, and then I just sewed under a stitch. So if you look at it, you can kind of see where the stitch is, and I just went in and then found in the next row the first stitch and went under that and back out. So this is really similar to how you would make a beanie if you're not using a magic circle. So after you sew all of this, you're just going to be pulling on that thread to cinch it together. You could also make like a bag doing this method. Once you've gone all the way around, you're going to pull it tight and then make a knot by going into the piece around the end of where the thread's coming from, making a loop, and then putting your thread and the needle through that loop. And you just do that like 3 or 4 times to make sure it's super secure. So now you can turn it inside out to see how it looks, and sometimes there's a small gap even though you've pulled it really tight, and the fiber could come out of it, the stuffing. So what I like to do, and I do this for beanies too if the hole's large, is I just sew over the top of the hole back and forth and pull it tight like that. And you want to do the same thing where you made the knots at the end as well right here. And when you're turning it inside out from where you were sewing and crocheting, that's technically the right side because you were making the seam on the inside out. So when it's like this where you can't see the strings, you're on the right side. And now you're just adding stuffing. So you usually want to put a little bit more than you think you need and really pat it down in there so it has a lot of fluff to it. So I had to open another bag, and it came with this little tool, and it was called a stuffing tool, and I took it out and looked at it and I was like, this is just like a chopstick. What is this? So now that you've filled it, you need a new piece of string to sew the top together to keep all the stuffing in. And this process is exactly the same to the bottom, except your string isn't attached from when you closed the crochet piece and attached the sides. So you just need to pull it through and then just make a knot. And knots are your friends. So anytime you see another piece of string or anything, just knot it on that, knot it on the actual piece, make a ton of knots because you don't want your thing coming undone. So the hole left here is a little bit bigger as well, but I'm not going to sew it closed because the stem is going to go on top of it, so I don't need to go through the extra process of sewing it closed. Okay, so now the stem. So you're going to do a slip knot just like in the beginning of the pumpkin crochet, and you can chain as many as you want for this. I did it a little differently every single time, but 10 or 11 is a good number. And then you're going to be doing a single crochet into that. So for a single crochet, you're not going to be yarning over before you go into the V. And for this, I just kept it flat. I didn't do the ribbing. So you're going to go under both parts of the V, not just the left or the top one. And you don't yarn over. You just put your hook straight into the V, and then you yarn over and pull that loop through the V, and then you have 2 loops on your hook. You yarn over and pull that new loop through the 2 loops on your hook, and that's a single crochet. And I did about 3 or 4 rows of single crochet, but I just did it until I thought it looked good because this will be the base of the stem. And to make the top part of the stem, like the long part, the long skinny part, I just skipped about 3 from the end of the last row of single crochet, and you can do 3 single crochet to get to the middle of the row, or you can just flat out skip them and go into the 4th single crochet. But you're just trying to create like a long sideways rectangle and then a long vertical rectangle in the middle of that, because then we're going to fold it and sew it so that it kind of looks like a stem. You're making the 2D version of a 3D object. So after I get to the middle, I did about 4 single crochets in the middle, and then I stopped, and then I chain 1 for the next row, and then go make 4 more single crochets, and then make the next row, and you just go back and forth up like that until it's as tall as you think it should be, like 5 or 6 more rows. And now I'm just taking the darning needle again to sew the two edges together so that it looks like a 3D object. So you just sew it together exactly how you did the closing of the top and bottom of the pumpkin. So as you can see, the string I left for myself isn't long enough, so I had to keep pushing the needle through and then putting the yarn through the needle eye to pull it through. So you just want to make sure the two ends where you're creating your first slip knot, leave that pretty long because you can use that to sew the base of the stem onto the pumpkin. And then your last piece, when you're tying off, also leave it pretty long because how I'm doing here, you can sew it and use it to sew your stem together. And now I'm just using the darning needle to sew the bottom of the stem onto the pumpkin. And that's your finished pumpkin. I hope you were able to follow that well and your pumpkin came out great. And thanks for watching.